right? Thank you so much for that call, Clint. Let's go to Kirsten in Cincinnati. Kirsten, what is up?
Oh, I'm just feeling grateful for you and everyone at Ramsey Solutions and that beautiful rant you just did and to be talking to you on the phone. So,
Well, I'm grateful for you. How can I help this morning?
good. I'm pretty awesome. So
I agree. I fully agree.
Yes, thank you. So my main question would be kind of where's the line between drinking a lot and alcoholism? And then for me, I guess it's pertaining somewhat to my husband. And I'd like to preface with he's an amazing man. He's very kind and thoughtful, hardworking. He treats me with lots of love and kindness and respect and tenderness and makes me feel loved. So I'm in a safe environment, and it's good. But I just notice a lot of times, we're both coming from very opposite backgrounds on the topic. My upbringing, as pertaining to alcohol, it was just never really around. My parents didn't drink. My grandparents didn't drink. My great-grandparents didn't drink. We didn't have alcohol really at family functions. It wasn't until I was older till you start noticing, like, oh, some of those family drinks. But
yeah, right. And they're
and
those families, right? Ooh, those families.
Yes.
That's right.
And growing up in church, it was kind of alcohol wasn't great, but it wasn't really elaborately talked about, and it was just kind of don't get drunk. And so that was the extent of that. And then my husband comes from Irish Catholic background, and that's like all they did.
They know how
and
to
that
party.
Was a bonding thing.
That's right.
Yes, and all like great-hearted people, fun stuff too. But I will be 31 this week, and I didn't have my first adult drink till I was probably 24, 26. I've probably had 4 or 5, just never worth the calories. And I'm somewhat of a control person, so I'm like, I'd rather just do nothing than risk trying to figure out stuff. So, but just him specifically, he grew up in a household, though, where his mom was an alcoholic, and she was that way pretty much from drinking age until she was about 40. And then she passed away at 45 due to a health condition. And then his dad was very black and white, and he traveled a lot as a profession. So he'd be gone 2, 3, 4 days a week. And he had one brother who was mentally disabled in the capacity of about a 2-year-old. And so a lot of times he would come home and his mom would be passed out on the couch or whatever, and he'd have to fill in and be the adult.
So he's had lots of trauma there, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely.
So
so I know. Sorry, go ahead.
I'll say go ahead. So bring me down to the apex here.
Okay, so we've been married for 2 years, and I've known him for 3.
Okay.
He's 33, I'm 31, and I knew that he drank some, but before, and it doesn't really bother me when it's social settings or just like here and there, but I just noticed it kind of creeping up more and more and more, and obviously this past year trying to have the grace of like, well, it is a pandemic and extra stress and things like that, but just where things to kind of watch for, because I so want to protect our connection and not project onto it.
Right.
And I want boundaries, not barriers, and just how to recognize when it crosses the unhealthy, and I'm going to take a breath.
Sure.
Okay.
All right. So that was a lot, and you actually called with one question, and you asked me about 5 different questions. Okay?
Yes, sorry.
Hey, that's okay. That's all right. And I can tell it's deep in your heart, and I can tell that you love this guy, and as happens to all of us who get married, all of us who find ourselves in some sort of deep relationship with somebody. And in fact, I'll go bigger than marriage. This happens at work. This happens with friendships. This happens in marriages. This happens in dating relationships. When you find yourself in love with somebody, when you find yourself trusting somebody, when you find yourself in relationship with somebody, deep relationship, and then suddenly a behavior that doesn't line up with your values, doesn't mean it's right or wrong inherently, but it's not a part of your values, is a part of theirs, right? And you're faced with a different picture of what something looked like. I was raised like you were. There wasn't any alcohol in my house. There wasn't alcohol in my granddad's house. It was a shock to me to find out in my probably 20s that my granddad used to drink beer. And he said to the family, I quit drinking beer. I quit buying beer when I had to buy milk for my babies. It was an economic decision.
Yeah.
And years down the road, I ingested that as a moral and character thing. My dad was a homicide detective. He worked every day in the lives of people who had one drink too many, and suddenly the rest of their life has changed, right? Mm-hmm. And so I absorbed that as a moral and character issue. Mm-hmm. Then I went to college. The statute of limitations hasn't run out on all those things, and so I won't tell all those stories, but I came to understand that there were some really extraordinary young men and women who I got to meet who were from all over the country who grew up with different attitudes around alcohol. I had some close friends, 2 of which are brothers, 2 of which are my best friends on planet Earth, Irish Catholic, and you know what they had? Way more fun than I did. They did. They danced more than I did. They sang more than I did. They could play music better than I could. And they had a family that celebrated big time, right? With good drinks and good food and good camaraderie. And so those were initially value issues for me. Whoa, this is, as you said so eloquently, one of those families. And it turns out that second to my parents, their parents had a major influence on me in a positive way. Their friendship has had a major impact on me relationally throughout my life, right? And so it could go on and on and on. All that to say is this. Your husband has experienced a lot of trauma in his life. Mm-hmm. From mom passing away at a really young age, mom being a functional alcoholic, dad being an on-the-road salesman, your husband having to be a surrogate parent to a special needs brother, and. And so what he has is a model of marriage, a model of relationship that is going to be different than yours. Okay? And so I've got way more concern, and concern's a dramatic word there. I've got way more, I have my eyes closer to that, to your differing pictures of what marriage looks like, what relationships will look like ongoing, than I do about alcohol. If you are safe and you are kind and he is kind and he loves you and he is there for you, then that's not my worry right now. I definitely think it's worth it, you guys seeing a marriage counselor for a regular amount of time, like for ongoing, to work through your differing pictures of what a relationship's going to be, and y'all co-create. He gets a voice, you get a voice in something together. You are not going to be able to protect this by yourself. He's going to have to be invested in this, and he's going to have to do a lot of transition and change, and you're going to have to do a lot of compromise and transition yourself. As y'all create a marriage that's going to be different than anything y'all two have ever experienced. Now, to go back to your original question, the difference between drinking and being an alcohol addict. Those two things are different. Alcohol addict is somebody that uses alcohol as a way to escape. An addict is somebody that cannot do without. Okay? They have to have this to get through a day. They have to have this to get through an event. They have to have this to get through a week. And ultimately, an addiction starts impairing your life. Right? It does usually start, not always, but it starts in a rather benign fashion. A glass of wine after work. And then a couple of days a week, that glass of wine turns into 2 or 3. Or I just have a couple of beers after work every day. And then on Fridays, I have 4 or 5. And then Saturday morning, I have a Bloody Mary just because, whoa. And then I go ahead and start drinking Saturday afternoon at 4 or 5. And it's just, I'm just having some whiskey, just having a bourbon, that's it. And I'm going to class it up a little bit. And suddenly, I'm doing it every day. Suddenly, those 1 drink or 2 beers a day become 3. They become 4. And suddenly, I'm not having fun without it. I'm not sleeping without it. I'm not fill in the blank without it. And now you got a problem, right? And so My guess is your husband doesn't have a model for someone who loves him and says, hey, I've noticed you going from year one to having a couple of beers when we'd go on dates or a couple of beers when we hang out to we're in a pandemic now and now you're drinking every single day. So
Yeah.
the concern one is the drinking, right? That's fair. But he's not going to have a picture for what somebody who loves him and is wanting to have a conversation with him looks like. And that's going to feel very judgy to him. It's going to feel very heavy to him.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yes, and we had that conversation.
How did it go?
Over it because he kind of takes space, processes things, and then comes out a lot of times like on the positive side, but it was never really like, oh yeah, that was right. It just starts like drinking less, like it starts registering with him. And because it was that kind of thing, it was like, oh, once a week, and now it's like twice a week, and it went from 2 to 3. And I just kind of said, like, have you noticed the past couple of months that you've like increasingly done this, and now we're here? And it was kind of a half response of that's like just the way that I was raised. It almost feels like alcohol to him is this friend, and this like it doesn't feel like it's full on gotten to like that addiction part. It's just this coping mechanism friend of like, oh, this is what I go to here. This is what I go to when I fish. This is what I go to when I clean my gun. This is what I go to because it's Friday night. And those kind of increased more. And I did kind of say, like, have you noticed that? And sometimes it's like, I like the taste or whatever. Sometimes he just then doesn't drink for a month. Like it just kind of varies on the situation.
Right. And
yes.
So what you're going to have to really work hard at in this new relationship, you're going to have to really work hard, is staying out of his head. Because the way you just described that to me is you asked him a question, he gave you an answer, and then you judged the answer because you didn't believe him. You got into his head, and you were deciding why he's drinking more. You got into his head and decide he may just like the taste when he's cleaning his gun. It may just be a moment of zen and chilling out, and he's having a beer while he's cleaning his gun. Or he's just having a beer with some buddies while he's going fishing. That's not weird. That's not unnatural or unnormal. And that doesn't mean he's got a problem. Right? It goes back to y'all are going to have to work on not the alcohol yet. You're going to have to work on your communication. And you have a picture where alcohol is bad. I can hear it in your voice. You've got a picture where alcohol consumption is not good or right, or to use religious terms, it's not holy. It is a crutch. It's a less than. And he doesn't have that picture. And so what you guys need to work on together is reframing it. And if you don't want alcohol in your home, you got to just be honest with him and tell him. You're probably going to have, like, say it when you're in therapy, right? Say it when you're with a marriage counselor and you got a neutral third party there. But if you're always going to have this tension around it, if you're always going to have this little bit of judgment against him, leaning up against him for this particular behavior, and I'm talking to everybody now, this doesn't just mean alcohol. This could be going to the gym. This could be wearing a mustache, dudes, or the way this particular shoes look, or whatever the thing is. If you've got that little bit of judgment against somebody, I just don't like the way you smack and you chew your food. I'm not ever going to say anything. I just don't like it. Then what you're doing is you're putting a tiny splinter in your relationship. You're putting a tiny wedge between each of you. And over time, that wedge just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And all sorts of things fall in there that never should have been there in the first place. Right? Things of not much consequence fall into this gap, and they feel so big, even though they're not. Even though they're not. So the question, the difference between drinking and alcohol, being an alcohol addict, being an addict means you can't function without it. Right? It impairs your everyday life. Having a few beers while you're fishing with your buddies doesn't sound like an alcohol addiction. It sounds like you have a picture of a husband, you have a picture of a home that doesn't include it, and you and your husband need to get on the same page about what your marriage is going to look like. So thank you so much for that call, Kirsten. I want you to go see a counselor, a marriage therapist with your husband. I want you to have an honest conversation together. And I want you to call me back and let me know how that conversation went. I want your husband to do some work on his childhood trauma. He had a tough road, and it sounds like he is overcoming a lot by continuing to love you. I want to hear how that conversation goes. So holler back at me. Thank you so much for the call.